Today, there are class action lawsuits for just about everything. Faulty car parts, asbestos, even breast implants. This story deals with class action lawsuits about slave labor during World War II. As we first reported last November, a group of American lawyers representing Holocaust survivors filed suits against everyone they say profited from the horrors of the war. They started with Swiss banks, then German banks, then insurance companies all over Europe. Now they're taking on the biggest names in German industry: Volkswagen, Daimler-Benz, Siemens, BMW, Krupp, demanding that they pay the Jews, Russians, Poles, and others who were forced to work for them as slaves. Bert Newborn, a professor at New York University Law School, is one of the lawyers filing the cases. Can you hold Volkswagen and Krupp and all the others responsible for what happened 50 years ago?
We think we can. Look, we don't want to criminally punish the people who were there. That was up to Nuremberg. That was the criminal aspect of this. What we want is for you to disgorge the money that you made from this. You earned enormous economic benefits by having people work for you for nothing. For nothing. Those profits belong to the people whose labor created them. And you've never attempted to compensate them. You've never conceded that you owe them any money, and it's time to pay up.
These were some of the forced and slave laborers the suits aimed to compensate. There were 7 million in all, prisoners of war, civilians rounded up from occupied Russia and Poland, and lowest on the ladder, Jews from the concentration camps. The Nazis had a policy. Jews who were fit to work shouldn't be killed right away. It was called Vernichtung durch Arbeit, literally, to be destroyed through work. One of them was Elly Gross. You were a slave.
Yes, I was.
You were a slave.
Yes.
Mrs. Gross is the lead plaintiff in one of Professor Newborn's lawsuits.
We were 500 in my group. We arrived to Fallesleben.
Fallesleben was the home of Volkswagen. Elly was 15 and alone when she arrived here. Her parents had been killed, her father at a labor camp. She was separated from her mother and brother at Auschwitz. They were sent to the gas chambers. She was sent to Volkswagen and lived inside the factory where there wasn't enough food and where the fumes made her ill. No doctor, no medicine, no care whatsoever. No. Has Volkswagen, have any of these companies made a public statement of apology, of contrition? Never.
No. Their position is that they did it. They're not happy that they did it, but that they did it essentially under the duress of the German government. But it's not their fault.
Under duress?
Under duress.
They were forced to take the slaves.
Well, yes. They say that there was no other way to get workers.
Is that true?
Well, there probably was no other way to get workers, but nobody held a gun to their head and said, well, then you have to then go ahead and use slaves or forced laborers. They had a choice. The choice was to have less production.
You're now part of this lawsuit. You're trying to sue Volkswagen. What do you hope to get?
I know Volkswagen and the other factories, they did not kill my parents and all the others. But they have some kind of responsibility toward us because they got rich on our slave labors.
We were less than slaves because we didn't matter. We were nothing. A number.
Rudy Kennedy was a slave laborer, not in a factory, but underground in a 9-mile-long network of secret tunnels here in the Harz Mountains in central Germany.
My heart rate is up and I'm feeling anxious.
You ready to go in?
I'm ready to go in.
It was his first time back in more than 50 years, and he was scared as he remembered that the first thing he often saw in the mornings were cranes used as gallows.
When we walked in, there were usually half a dozen to a dozen people hanging from the cranes in most contorted, terrible to look at. So when I walked in, I said, am I going to end up there?
Rudy Kennedy was one of 60,000 slave laborers who worked in the mountain and lived at Dora, an adjoining concentration camp. They helped build some of the Nazis' most sophisticated and secret weapons, including Werner von Braun's V-2 rockets and the V-1 flying bomb that was used to terrorize London in the last days of the war. Remnants sit rusting in the tunnel today. And you saw them making these things?
Yes.
Actually, you helped make these things.
Well, we bought parts. We bought the parts, yeah.
Just a few years ago, he learned it was Volkswagen that held the contract to build the V1 and delivered parts to be assembled in the tunnels. Conditions here were among the worst imaginable. When U.S. Army troops liberated this area in 1945, they recorded on film the slave laborers who the fleeing Nazis had left behind, young men who'd been beaten, starved, and of course never paid. 20,000 of them died.
My overriding thought, which blotted everything out, was hunger. It was all-embracing. You just thought, will I get something to eat? And will I get through this day?
As we went deeper into the tunnel, he found the area where he had spent much of his time.
Here, a lot of people died, suffered before they died. And I was consumed with this belief that my end had come. There's a psalm, I hope I can quote it. It says, "Yea, though I go in the valley of the shadow of death." And I have to say, I fear the evil, because thou have abandoned us to evil men, to people who tortured us, to assassins.
The evidence of what happened to him and the others was also abandoned. After the war, the U.S. military recruited Wernher von Braun to build American rockets. To keep from being criticized for hiring a Nazi, the U.S. sealed the records of what had gone on inside the tunnels. But at a cemetery in Wolfsburg, Germany, the home of Volkswagen, there was plenty of evidence of what had happened. Our guide was Betty Rannenberg, who heads up a group in the town that has been pushing Volkswagen to pay the people who were forced to work for them. She showed us the graves of young forced laborers from Russia and Poland, and infants, lots of infants. Baby.
Yes.
Baby.
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 Yes.
Oh my goodness. These are babies taken away from captive women, babies left to die in a company nursery. Look, this one,
Yes.
less than a day.
It died on the day of birth. Yes.
Conditions at Volkswagen were no worse than at other German companies. Siemens used tens of thousands of concentration camp inmates at its electric and communications plants. Daimler-Benz and BMW built military trucks, tanks, and airplane engines using slave laborers. After years of stonewalling about its forced and slave laborers, Volkswagen in the 1980s admitted its role and donated $7 million to Eastern European and Jewish charities. Then, just weeks before it was hit with 2 slave labor lawsuits, Volkswagen announced a new $12 million humanitarian fund that will go directly to its former workers. A month later, Siemens did the same. None of the companies would give us an interview. Bert Newborn says the new funds are not enough.
In fairness to Volkswagen, of all the German companies, they've expressed, I think, the greatest concern with this.
But didn't Volkswagen know that they were about to be sued when they proposed this humanitarian fund?
Well, that's true.
So it wasn't just their conscience.
No, it wasn't just their conscience, but in fairness, I suspect that some of it was their conscience. I hope it was. I hope it was.
While nobody denies that people like Elly Gross and Rudy Kennedy suffered a terrible injustice, not everybody supports the idea of the lawsuits filed on their behalf. Abe Foxman, the director of the Anti-Defamation League, thinks the emphasis on money sends the wrong message.
If by putting a dollar amount on slave labor, we close the books and they're no longer guilty, I'm not sure it's worth it. I'm not sure it's worth it.
Foxman, himself a survivor of the Holocaust, says that for 50 years, many Holocaust survivors didn't want to talk about material loss.
because talking about the material loss would diminish the grotesque, the horrendous human loss, the human tragedy. And now, all we're talking about is material loss.
If Volkswagen is made to pay you,
Yes.
is that justice? Then has justice been done?
Justice never could be done. The justice is always remains open because our broken life cannot be put together, ever.
Nevertheless, she says, it is only right that Volkswagen should compensate her for her work.
I think it's legally right that if someone is working, has to be paid. If you work any place, anywhere in the world, you have to be paid. We were not paid.
The suggestion is that if you pay her, she's compensated for her loss.
Money can't compensate.
Well, but is that not one of the potential messages from all of this?
Well, Leslie, yes. I mean, of course, it's someone could read that message and say, "You've reduced the most extraordinary human suffering in the past century to just items of dollars and cents."
Well,
and that
people
would be
have said
a terrible thing. It seems to me that there's a double message here. The first message is money can't make this right. Money does not compensate for what happened to her. On the other hand, it's no more right to say that someone who made money from this gets to keep it.
This could be just the beginning. After you do the Swiss banks and the German banks, there's the Argentine banks, there's the Austrian banks, there's the Swedish banks, and then companies all around the world that may have benefited in some way from the Holocaust.
Well, that makes my concern even greater. That means the next generation, we will talk about what? We will talk about Jews and their money, Jews and their gold, Jews and their property. It will only reinforce that Jews didn't die because they were Jews. They died because of their money. I believe that we are desecrating the memory of 6 million who died solely because of who they were, Jews.
Abe Foxman is terribly concerned that you come to the end of the millennium and the statement on the Holocaust is about money.
I wouldn't worry about that. When we first started, people said, you're going to create anti-Semitism because it will show that you Jews just want money. Anti-Semitism is not created by Jews, it's created by non-Jews. If they believe that the only reason we're doing is for money, well, let them believe that. Let them believe that.
Talks are now underway between lawyers for Holocaust survivors and the German companies who use slave labor. The U.S. State Department, which is overseeing the negotiations, says the goal is to reach a financial settlement by September 1st, the 60th anniversary of the start of World War II.